Sup guys, Bjorn here. Today we're taking a look at the Survival Hunter, a complete guide. I hope you're gonna enjoy it a ton, as I'm enjoying the Survival Hunter a ton currently actually. It's one of my favorite melee specs in Shadowlands. I would strongly advise you guys to check it out. Maybe once 9.1.5 comes out you can get an alt up to par with Hunter if you don't already have one. Before we get into the video, make sure you leave a like and maybe even subscribe down below, because I'm gonna be releasing a ton of new content coming up to 9.1.5 and also after the patch has been released. Alright guys, without further ado, let's get into the video. The very first thing you want to do on your Survival Hunter is to open up the spellbook and go to the General tab. Now on the first last page here you will see something called Weapon Skills. If you hover over that and read it, you will gain some crucial information about the Survival Hunter. Hunters perform best with the following weapons: bows, crossbows and guns, and they can also equip staves and polearms. So you'll quickly see here that Blizzard doesn't really intend for you to ever play a Survival Hunter in any sort of serious way. You can do it if you want to have some fun on an off spec, but yeah, don't main this thing is basically what Blizzard is trying to tell you here. And I am gonna have to disagree with them. I think that survival is a ton of fun. It's actually really good in dungeons as well, and it doesn't deserve the horrible community perception it has. So please allow me to change your mind about this spec. In terms of the playstyle, it is a fairly simple, like, juggling kind of playstyle where you are constantly trying to catch a ton of different balls in the air, right? You have stuff falling off, you have globals that you need to press, maybe there's abilities that are coming up on their second charge that you need to spend, maybe you have focus overcapping, maybe you have serpent sting running off, whatever it can be. There's always something you need to do with your next global on the Survival Hunter, and that can create a little bit of a stressful playstyle. I would probably akin it most to like something like the Fury Warrior perhaps, or something like that, where you do have quite a fast playstyle, quite a lot of haste, and you're just basically spamming whatever lights up. So there are some talents, however, that change the playstyle from being like completely brain dead to actually requiring some thinking, and it is these talents that saves the spec in my opinion. There are also some like dots, you have some debuffs, you have some random shit, but in terms of the rotation it's actually fairly straightforward. Now when it comes to the damage profile, you will pump a ton, especially on uncapped AoE, because you're completely uncapped, right? The shrapnel bombs, the wildfire bombs, that is your biggest AoE ability, is completely uncapped. Your legendary is also uncapped, so this means that you will do a ton of damage on uncapped AoE, and you're still doing like a fair amount of damage on 5 targets. You're not bad on AoE by any means, but there's no way that you're gonna reach like Windwalker numbers or even maybe Marksmanship Hunter numbers on like 5 targets. All in all, it does have a very strong versatile profile for dungeons, because you will do good AoE, you will do very good uncapped AoE, you will do decent single target even with an AoE build. So all in all, pretty damn strong class. You also have the Hunter utility, right, with Misdirect, you have the Pet Lust, you have some stealth, some feign death stuff. So definitely, all in all, a pretty useful dungeon class. When it comes to the strengths and weaknesses, as I mentioned in the overview, you have good consistent AoE, you have really good uncapped AoE, you have good burst AoE with your CDs, you also have some decent single target, and some decent utility in dungeons. Now what you don't have is raid utility, you don't have any raid CDs, you're very squishy, and you're like way squishier than most other melee specs, because you're not just a hunter with no defensives, right? You're also in melee all the time, getting hit by frontals, getting hit by storming, sanguine, whatever it can possibly be in there. So that means that it is probably one of the more dangerous specs to play. You will maybe die some if you aren't careful. But the biggest weakness of the Survival Hunter, in my opinion, is the horrible community perception it has, right? And it is fairly reasonable that it has a bad community perception in raid, because as I mentioned, it doesn't have a raid buff, it's very squishy, and it's a melee spec, so why would you ever bring it to raid? But in dungeons, I, on the contrary, think it's actually a really strong spec, and it nowhere near deserves the horrible community perception it has currently. So we're gonna move into talents here, and Before I move into the talents completely, I just wanted to go over quickly your main abilities and how they play, right? This is not going to be a rotation guide. We're going to take a look at the rotation after the talents later on, but this is just to get your minds thinking about what you actually want to do as a survival hunter, right? And we have the wildfire bomb. That wildfire infusion turns into a couple of different bombs. This thing is incredibly good. It's your main AoE damage. It's what you want to keep on using a ton on both single target and AoE, right? So if you realize that the survival hunter is mostly about these bombs, then the talents will make a lot more sense. First of all, we have wildfire infusion, if we're starting from the bottom here, and this is by far the most interesting talent in the whole survival tree. It provides some nice gameplay improvements on both single target and AoE especially. So it's just simply the by far best talent in here. You should always take this on AoE in dungeons, and yeah, it's just really, really good. What it does is it turns your wildfire bomb into 3 different bombs that are coming up on a random rotation. Whenever you use one, you'll get a random next one. The shrapnel bomb, which we currently have right here, is gonna apply a debuff that makes our Carve and Raptor Strike, aka our spenders, apply a dot to the target. So shrapnel bomb, aka wildfire bomb, doesn't cost any focus, right? So we send this out, and now we're supposed to carve all of the mobs to apply bleed, and then we can also like Raptor Strike them again to apply the bleed again, and carve again once the carve comes up. So the shrapnel bomb is fairly straightforward, but the one thing we need to keep in mind there is that we have a lot of focus going into it, right? So when we're about to throw the shrapnel bomb, we actually are capped already so that we have enough focus to do a carve, to do another carve once the carve comes back up, and to do Raptor Strikes. The opposite is true of the pheromone bomb, right? The pheromone bomb will apply a debuff that allows kill command to reset on that target. So before we throw the pheromone bomb, we kind of want to be out of focus, because once we throw it, we can use kill command to regenerate all of that focus, because it's going to reset 100% of the time. Now, this isn't really a huge deal with the pheromone bomb on AoE. It won't really affect your DPS that much if you use it well or not. And the main thing about both shrapnel bomb and pheromone bomb, honestly, is just the like explosion damage, the ticking damage from the dot, and the legendary damage. So nothing at all that you need to think about too much. When you need to think about, however, is the volatile bomb here. And this is going to refresh all of your serpent stings on the targets. It's also going to do a big explosion if you hit something with your serpent sting on them. So you can see here on the damage meter, we have serpent sting. Obviously, since we just reapplied all of those, we have the legendary that we're going to talk about more later, called Wildfire Cluster, doing a ton of damage from those bombs. But here at the third, we have Violent Reaction, and this is the thing where you hit a target with the serpent sting and the bomb explodes. And this Violent Reaction is also uncapped, so it becomes even better on like 10 targets, 20 targets. You don't need to serpent sting up everything, you just need to serpent sting up a few mobs, and this will still do some good value. So the volatile bomb is by far the best one. It's also the one that's the most important that you play around correctly, right? If you don't refresh any serpent stings with this, then you're gonna see your value drop quite a bit. But if you do consistently refresh serpent stings to the volatile bomb, then it is gonna be incredibly strong. Something else to keep in mind about the bombs and wildfire infusion in general is just that these things have a cone, right? So you throw them at one target, then they explode in a cone after that, which means that you need to think about where you aim this stuff, right? You should not throw bombs at the mob furthest away in the pack. If you throw a bomb at this guy, you can see the bomb only explodes in a cone over here, whereas these two front mobs here, they don't even get hit. So you really need to make sure that you position correctly, you target the right mob, and you explode the bomb in a cone to hit all of the mobs in the pack. So all of this together makes Wildfire Infusion a fairly complex talent. You need to think about quite a lot of stuff when you use this. But on the other hand, if you don't think about it, you're not going to lose a ton of DPS, especially not on Pheromone and Shrapnel Bomb. Now, the 45 row is one where you have actually some choice. And here you can play either Flanking Strike or Tip of the Spear. Both are fine. Flanking Strike is a generator on a 30-second cooldown. It is pretty good. You will run out of focus occasionally on both AoE and single target. And the good thing about this on AoE is that you could, for example, do something like bomb, carve, bomb, and then if you like accidentally do 2 raptor strikes here, you don't have enough focus to carve again, then you could maybe save that with a quick flanking strike cooldown. Otherwise, I don't think flanking strike is particularly good. It's just something if you want like another thing to press, if you think survival has too few buttons, or if you're just more a fan of generating with this on AoE than you're spending with Tip of the Spear, because Tip of the Spear is gonna be a completely passive talent that just increases the damage of your Raptor Strike whenever you kill command. It stacks up 3 times. So on single target, you might Raptor Strike about as often as you kill command, which means that this thing is not really gonna stack up that often maybe. But on AoE, you have a lot of other stuff to do, right? You need to Serpent Sting, you need to carve, you need to spend all of your bombs. So, and also you need to generate with kill command, right? So chances are you won't really be Raptor Striking a lot at all on AoE, which means that once you do Raptor Strike, chances are you are gonna have 3 of these charges actually stored up. So this thing can work fairly well on AoE. Now, if you get more haste, if there are more targets, if you need to Serpent Sting more or whatever, then you can also find yourself in situations where you simply don't really have enough focus to spare to actually Raptor Strike. Like, where are you gonna get your Raptor Strikes from when you need to Serpent Sting everything all the time? And this is where Flanking Strike might be better than Tip of the Spear on full AoE. But in a general dungeon over the course of the entire run, I think that Tip of the Spear is gonna edge out Flanking Strike a little bit. Obviously, this is entirely up to you. You can play either. Mongoose Bite is something that you cannot play, however, in dungeons. It's really awful. It's just a single target talent. You can play it in raid with another build that we're gonna talk about later, but don't play this in dungeons ever. On the next row, you have a utility row where you could obviously choose whatever you like. However, I would definitely prefer Binding Shot in dungeons most of the time. It's a really strong utility spell that you pop down on the pack, then the tank can move away and the mobs will run after him and they'll get rooted. So it's just something to help your tank kite, especially useful on weeks like Necrotic or whenever your tank needs to kite a lot. On the 35 row, we have Steel Trap, which is a completely single target talent, so we're never going to play this in dungeons. Murder of Crows, which sounds good on paper, but the problem with this is that it costs 30 focus. We're already kind of a little bit struggling with the focus on AoE, right? It also costs us global, it doesn't really do a ton of damage, and you're gonna have to manage it a lot, and it also lasts for 15 seconds, which is just way too long if you want something to reset, right? Because if you think about a typical 5 target pull here, if you just Murder of Crows, I don't sadly have it on my bar, but if I drag it down here, and I Murder of Crows this mob here, this is gonna last for 15 seconds, well, chances are, by the time the pack is dead, this thing will have run out, and you won't really be able to reapply it onto anything else, because the whole pack will be dead once that mob that you have applied it to is dead, right? So, in practice, this doesn't really play out very well at all. I would pretty much never ever play Murder. I would never play Steel Trap on AoE, which only leaves Bloodseeker. And Bloodseeker basically just makes it so that kill command applies a dot. It's an entirely passive talent. You will get some pretty decent value out of this because you will still change targets a lot on AoE, right? Because you need to reapply Serpent Stings to different targets, you need to move around and aim bombs at different targets, so you will just naturally switch targets a lot on AoE. This just means that Bloodseeker will get even more value because you will naturally just like kill command whatever target you're currently attacking, right? Which means that you will probably spread this around to like 2 or 3 different enemies on AoE. The good thing about Bloodseeker, however, is that if you play a dungeon with a class that can AoE bleed, it's really, really good. So if you're playing with a Guardian Druid, a Feral Druid, an Arms Warrior, or some other class that can like AoE bleed everything instantly all the time, then this is gonna do so much more for you. And it also synergizes a little bit with that shrapnel bomb, right? Because shrapnel, remember, it spread an AoE bleed to the entire pack if you carved it. So once you spread that bleed, you will actually get full value of Bloodseeker on the entire pack, which is really, really strong. So this is pretty much a brain dead selection. I would always go Bloodseeker here. On row 30, it's again a utility row. You can pick whatever you like. The best one is probably Camouflage or Natural Mending. I typically just play Trailblazer because I like how it makes me run fast. I love being fast. It's a lot of fun. Then we have 25, and this is again a pretty set in stone row because Guerrilla Tactics is just really, really strong. It allows you to get 2 charges of Wildfire Bomb, which is huge, right? It helps your burst a lot, since if you don't have 2 charges, you will go into every single pool and you will pop your CDs and you will do 1 bomb and then you won't have anything else while you're waiting for that bomb to recharge. If you, however, have 2 charges, as I do now, then you can just spam out a lot more bombs on the pool in these Resonating Arrow and Coordinated Assault windows. And that's really the biggest thing about Guerrilla Tactics, right? Because you want to front load all of your damage in the Resonating Arrow window, and if you can get out like 3 or 4 bombs in that arrow, it's gonna be way, way better than if you only get out like 1 or 2 bombs if you don't have Guerrilla Tactics. Now, the initial explosion dealing 100% increased damage is also very, very good. It's incredibly good. Usually in a full dungeon overall, after I complete a key, just the initial explosion portion of my bombs usually do anywhere from like 15 to 20% of my overall. So they actually do a ton of damage. And yeah, Guerrilla Tactics, really, really base. I would probably play it in every single scenario. Hydrospite is something you could consider if you purely like playing for fun. If you think this thing sounds hilarious, go for it, but I think it's gonna fall behind quite a bit on damage, because it allows you to Serpent Sting 3 mobs at a time instead. But the problem is, like, at 3 mobs, then you're not really gaining that much, right? Because you could spend 2 extra globals on an extra Serpent Sting. It doesn't really matter that you have this huge Serpent Sting. On 6 targets, it starts to matter, right? Because then you can Serpent Sting twice, and you can get all of the Serpent Stings out instantly, pretty much, which is pretty good. But on 6 targets, you've also got to remember that you're going to lose so much damage from not having Guerrilla Tactics here. Both from the 2 charges and from the initial explosion. So Hydrospite doesn't really have a good number of targets where it shines. It just kind of falls behind Guerrilla Tactics on every single number of targets. Butchery is again also a really horrible talent, sadly, because what it does, it replaces Carve, but Carve has a 4.8 second cooldown and Butchery has a 7.1 second cooldown. So you will take a talent to carve less. And remember, Carve doesn't really do a lot of damage, it just reduces the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb. So the main thing about Carve is that you can Wildfire Bomb more, but you take then a talent to make you Wildfire Bomb less, which is really horrible. Butchery is also capped, so that good thing you have about Survival Hunter being uncapped, shining on like 10, 15, 20 target pulls, is going to be completely removed if you play Butchery. So this is just a dead talent. Never pick this in a dungeon, even though it seems like the dungeon AoE talent choice. It's really not. Pick Guerrilla Tactics. On the first row, however, you do have a bit of choice again, and there's a lot of players playing Viper's Venom. I personally don't really like it, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. First of all, I think that Alpha Predator just synergizes pretty well with Tip of the Spear and Bloodseeker. So if you're not playing Tip of the Spear, for example, if you prefer Flanking Strike, then I could also see you maybe going Viper's Venom here instead of Alpha Predator. But if you're playing both Bloodseeker and Tip of the Spear, I think that Alpha Predator is pretty damn strong. Now, the difference between Viper's Venom and Alpha Predator is mainly going to come from single target and AoE, right? So on AoE, you won't Raptor Strike a lot. You will pretty much only Raptor Strike to spend those Tip of the Spear charges, and even then you won't maybe Raptor Strike very often to spend those. So this means that Viper's Venom almost never ever procs an AoE. And this makes it a fairly dead talent during most of the dungeon. Now, on single target, it is going to proc a lot, and it's going to do a lot of damage compared to Alpha Predator, but I just find it too unreliable, it doesn't really proc for most of the dungeon, and Alpha Predator, along with doing more damage on AoE, it also has that extra quality of life of giving you 2 kill command charges. And this is actually pretty good because it just allows you to get yourself out of those situations where, for example, you've accidentally just Raptor Strike like 1 too many times and you're like, fuck, I'm at 30 focus. Then you can just pop up 2 of those in order to spend whatever you need to spend on. If you, for example, need to both reapply your little Serpent Sting and you need to Carve, or you need to like Raptor Strike, then getting that focus up quicker with 2 kill command charges is pretty nice. And the 30% increased kill command damage, it's not going to be massive because kill command doesn't really do that much damage to begin with, but it's still just going to work throughout the entire dungeon. So what if you want to play a single target hunter then? Well, there is a pretty decent single target build for survival. You go Birds of Prey, Mongoose Bite and Steel Trap instead. So you're completely ignoring Wildfire Infusion. You're basically shifting the focus of the build from bombs to your Mongoose Bite. And your Mongoose Bite is something that stacks up to 5 times, increasing the damage with each consecutive hit, which means that you will want to have these windows where like just pump with Mongoose Bite. So that's why Birds of Prey is good. You will extend the duration of Coordinated Assault every time you Mongoose Bite. If you Mongoose Bite a lot, you'll have even longer Coordinated Assault, which makes you do even more damage with Mongoose Bite. Steel Trap is played because it's a single target talent, but it also has some really good synergy with the Legendary of the single target build. So we are going to go into the Legendaries here, and I'm going to tie them into the talent builds a little bit. We basically have 2 different Legendaries for survival that are viable. We have the Wildfire Cluster, which is what I play in every single scenario, and it's incredibly good with this build in dungeons, on AoE. It just makes it so that every single bomb you throw is going to do even more AoE damage. It's completely passive, it's uncapped, it's just amazing, honestly. It ends up doing somewhere around 10% of my overall in every single dungeon, so just a very good Legendary. If you're playing the single target build in Raid, however, you could you would definitely want to go for Nessingware's Trapping Apparatus. And this synergizes with your Steel Trap, this synergizes with your other traps. It makes it so that you get 45 focus and increases focus gains when you do a trap. So you can see how this build is starting to play, right? You do Birds of Prey for a long Coordinated Assault, then you stack that Coordinated Assault full of Mongoose Bites in like a last window with some trinkets maybe. And in that window, you also try to proc as many traps as possible in order to keep the focus going, in order to spend more Mongoose Bites. So here, we are getting our focus from the Legendary and not from the kill command as much, which means that the kill command talents are just completely bad, right? Because you're not using kill command as much. So here we definitely go Viper's Venom over Alpha Predator, and Tip of the Spear and Bloodseeker is really useless, considering also that Steel Trap and Mongoose Bite is incredibly useful. However, I've never really tried this build out. I haven't crafted a Lego. I don't know too much about how to play it. So if you're interested in like trying out survival in Raid and you want to play this build, then I'm sure there's going to be some guide out there somewhere. But for me, I'm not going to talk about it because I simply don't know enough about it. And I also think that survival is way more fun to play in dungeons than in raids. So for me personally, I've never really felt the draw to even try this. So what if you don't want to play Wildfire Cluster or Nessingware Trap Apparatus then? Well, you don't really have a lot of choice, sadly, because Butcher's Bone Fragments is dog shit, Latent Poison Injectors is also pretty bad, especially considering how much maintenance it requires. Now, you could try some really spicy build with like Viper's Venom, Hydra's Bite, Latent Poison Injectors, but I think it's going to fall behind massively on damage, although it could probably be pretty fun to play. The other legendaries are kind of bad. One that you could consider playing is Pact of the Soul Stalkers. It was going to buff your critical strike chance of your party by 10%, which is really strong considering that your Resonating Arrow is a 40-second cooldown with Forge Light Prime. and you can actually buff your party quite a lot with this. Now, obviously in pugs this ain't gonna be very great, but if you're running like very high keys in coordinated groups, then Pact of the Soulstalkers could definitely be something you consider. However, if you're running very high keys in coordinated groups, then you're never ever gonna wanna miss out on the extra damage from Wildfire Cluster probably. So I personally think that Wildfire Cluster should be run in 99% of scenarios. Moving on to the Soulbinds then, as I briefly mentioned, Fortlight Prime Mechanicos here, it's really strong Soulbind, and I am Kyrian on this hunter. Now, personally, I would either go Kyrian or Night Fae. I think both are fine. The difference here is that if you go Night Fae, you're gonna index very heavily into the 2-minute profile, right? With Coordinated Assault, you're gonna do Wild Spirits, you're gonna pop everything with your trinkets in that 2-minute window, and you're gonna do a ton of damage. But you aren't going to be as consistent outside of that 2-minute window. Also, you're not quite going to be as strong as Uncapped AoE, I think, because Resonating Arrow is better in Uncapped than Wild Spirits are. The good thing about Kyrian is that Resonating Arrow is a little bit more flexible, right? You won't have to line it up with Coordinated Assault every time, and if you're playing Fortlight Prime Mechanicos with this last ability here, Effusive Anima Accelerator, this means that your Resonating Arrow is going to be 40-second cooldown if you use it on AoE, which means that you will have a lot more leeway trying to line this up with Coordinated Assault. You'll be able to get 3 Resonating Arrows into every Coordinated Assault more or less, and you'll also have a bit of leeway when you're not really lining them up properly. You can actually maybe send out some Resonating Arrows when you shouldn't really have been able to if it was 1-minute CD. All this just means that Kyrian for me is the most fun and the best, because you're gonna be able to pump on more packs in the dungeon, right? 40-second CD better than 2 minutes. If you are Kyrian, I would definitely suggest you play Fortlight Prime Mechanicos, because the last talent here, Effusive Anima Accelerator, makes it so that your Resonating Arrow is a 40-second CD instead of a 1-minute one. This allows you to get in 3 Resonating Arrows into every Coordinated Assault, first of all, if you use it effectively, which is very, very strong in dungeons. It also allows you to do some extra damage on a 5-target pull, for example, with the arrow. It's pretty damn good in dungeons. And it can allow you to get some extra leeway with squeezing in these arrows. For example, if you have Coordinated Assault coming up in 30 seconds, and we're going into a pack here, normally you would not be able to use Resonating Arrow. You'd want to hold it for that next Coordinated Assault, right? But in this scenario, since Resonating Arrow is a 40-second CD and Coordinated Assault is only 30 seconds away, but it lasts for 20 seconds. So you could actually just send down your Resonating Arrow here. It's gonna be 40 seconds away, and then you'll kill the pack, you'll move on to the next one, and once your Coordinated Assault is up, you can pop that straight away, and then 10 seconds into this Coordinated Assault, you're actually going to have your arrow up again, right? And you're going to be able to use that last 10 seconds of Coordinated Assault with the arrow. So you can have those little weird like alignment games where you actually are able to pop Resonating Arrow a lot more than you would normally be able to without Mechanicos. This is why I personally think Mechanicos is just by far the best one. It's also very, very fun to play with a 40-second cooldown arrow instead of a 1-minute one. In terms of the conduits I use in this build here, I am first of all running Strength of the Pack Empowered. I think it's probably the best conduit that Survival Hunter has. It allows you to get a 7% damage buff whenever you reset Kill Command's cooldown, and Kill Command's cooldown is reset a ton, right? You have Coordinated Assault buffing the reset chance by 25%, so in your big CDs, this is going to have a very, very strong uptime. You have Pheromone Bomb, always resetting this, so whenever you have Pheromone Bomb up, this is obviously going to proc every single time, and just even without that, I think that Kill Command resets a fair amount by itself, so Strength of the Pack, very, very strong in all scenarios. Now, as your second empowered potency conduit, you could go for Enfeebled Mark or Flame Infusion here, and I know a lot of people would probably prefer Enfeebled Mark, but the thing is, I think that Flame Infusion is going to edge out Enfeebled Mark a little bit. The two different philosophies are as follows, right? You have Enfeebled Mark, which is a 12% flat damage increase to things inside of your arrow. And the good thing about this is that when you pop your arrow, you are definitely gonna have like a ton of stuff up, right? You might have coordinated assault up, you might have like 3 bombs in that arrow window probably, and that just means that that 12% increased damage from the conduit is actually gonna end up mattering a lot. You're gonna spend a lot of damage in this window. The thing about Flame Infusion, however, is that it actually works all the time, and it stacks up to 2 times, and it goes off of Carve. So Carve is something you always use on cooldown on AoE, right? So you're gonna have quite a bit of uptime on this Flame Infusion buff. The big problems with Flame Infusion are as follows, right? You have only the explosion component of the bomb being modified. So the dot effect of the bomb is not going to be increased. However, if you're playing guerrilla tactics, the initial bomb is actually doing like a ton of damage already. So that's not really a big problem in my opinion. The other problem with this is that when you go into a pack here, right, and you pop your coordinated assault, you pop your arrow, you're not going to carve first, right? You're going to do bomb, carve, bomb, and then you're going to carve once more, and then you're going to bomb again. And now, from now on, is where you start like carving almost twice per bomb, right? This doesn't really happen at the start of the rotation, which means that it will definitely lose some value at the start of the pulse. So I would recommend you guys to play as following. If the pulls are lasting really long, if you have big uncapped AoE, if you're churning away at those mobs for like a minute at a time, or 30 seconds, 40 seconds, then I think that Flame Infusion is going to be really strong. If, however, you're just doing a weekly 15, you're going in, you're just blowing up a pack with the arrow in the duration of the coordinated assault, pretty much, more or less, right? Then I think that maybe Enfeebled Mark is going to be a little bit better. Regardless, I'm running both of these, just not empowered with Enfeebled Mark, right? So it's not going to be a massive difference either way. In terms of the other potency conduits, you have Deadly Tandem and Stinging Strike. Some people will probably now tell me that Stinging Strike is better than Flame Infusion. I will just say, frankly, no, it's not. It obviously depends on what content you're doing, etc, etc. But if you take a look at my overall damage from Sting or from Raptor Strike in a dungeon, it's usually somewhere between 10 and 15%. And if you take a look at my overall damage from the Wildfire Bomb explosions, it's usually somewhere between 15 and 20%. And the Carve buff is actually better than the Raptor Strike buff as well, right? In terms of the Endurance and the Finesse conduits, there isn't really a whole much to say here. I would personally prefer playing Reversal of Fortune as your empowered Finesse one, because getting 10 or 12 focus every time you interrupt is actually a lot of fun, and it also has that minor DPS increase, right? So I would definitely recommend playing that one. In terms of the defensive ones, doesn't really matter too much. I personally cannot for the life of me remember to apply Hunter's Mark. It's just my brain does not want to acknowledge that the spell exists. So I'm never playing Marksman's Advantage, but if you actually apply Hunter's Mark, then I'm sure that this is really good. Condensed Atmosphere and Resilience of the Hunter, however, I think are also kind of fine. One thing I did want to mention here as well is that once you have Force Light Prime Mechanicals, you have all of these empowered Soulbinds, you have the effusive Anima Accelerator, you have the good conduits, you have the Legendary with the Wildfire Cluster, right? Once you have all of that stuff, then you're gonna see a massive increase to your Survival Hunter damage, because all of these things are actually really strong for survival compared to most other specs, right? Your Legendary does like 10 to 15% of your overall in dungeon. Your conduits are all really strong for once. Your Soulbinds are incredibly good, so I would definitely recommend you getting this stuff. So moving on to stats and gear, we're gonna go through this pretty quick here. We have 4 different stats, and the best one by far is haste. You definitely want to go full haste. It impacts your cooldowns, obviously, but the most important thing is that it impacts Shrapnel Bomb CD, it impacts Carve CD, and Carve is a flat reduction on Wildfire Bomb itself, right? So every single time you carve, you're gonna get 5 seconds of the Wildfire Bomb, which means that if you can lower the cooldown of Carve, that will actually also indirectly get you a ton of Wildfire Bomb uptime, because you can carve more. So just getting a ton of haste is incredibly useful. You also scale very well with like haste cooldowns. for example, Lust, PI, IQD, some haste trinkets and stuff like that, is really, really strong for you in cooldowns. We can see here just the difference between me going in and doing a rotation without any haste buffs and with full haste buffs. So if I go in here, I do bomb, carve, bomb. Then we're waiting for the carve cooldown. Once that shit comes up, we can do another carve, another bomb, and this is pretty much our rotation, right? So you can see we're not really bombing that often. We're gonna have to wait for these a lot. But if we instead go into this pull with a full haste buff, then it's gonna look vastly different. And hopefully I'm gonna get haste from my IQD here, otherwise it would be pretty sad, but whatever, can't win every time. Okay, so we're lusting and we're IQDing. I did get haste from IQD, thank God for that. You can see here already that it's not just a little bit more bombs, right? It's a ton more bombs because of that Carve cooldown. So it's a ton more fun to play with a lot of haste. You will do way, way more damage with a ton of haste as well. After you max out your haste, you kind of want to go for verse, because crit and mastery are kind of yikes, right? You have crit, which is already taken care of by a resonating arrow. This is going to give you a 30% crit chance. Sure, it's not going to proc your DR on the 30% when you get to that max crit value or anything, but it is indirectly going to lower the value of crit a little bit, right? Because if you already have a lot of crit, your other stats become more useful. So crit is not the best, but it's definitely by no means bad, and it's your third best stat. Then we have mastery, which is just a completely dead stat for survival, because it only impacts your focus spending abilities, which is Carve, Raptor Strike, Serpent Sting, Kill Shot, right? There are some of them, but importantly enough, your Wildfire Bombs do not cost any focus, which means that they will not be affected by mastery. And since upwards of like 40-50% of your damage in a dungeon is just from Wildfire Bombs, then mastery is obviously a completely useless stat in AoE. And you should never ever play mastery on Survival Hunter. I would prefer this to be at 0% mastery, but unfortunately I do have a little bit of mastery from some pieces that I can't really control, right? We have the 200 weapon here with 94 mastery, for example, kind of sus. And then we have verse, which is gonna impact your Wildfire Bomb damage, right? And it's also gonna make you more tanky, which means that it is the second best stat after that haste. If you can't really be fucked, I would just say go for haste first, and then crit verse doesn't really matter too much. Stay away from mastery though. And when it comes to specific gear, you obviously have those haste on use trinkets that I talked about with the IQD. You also have Wakener's Frond, which is incredibly strong. And this is something where if you can get your hands on a Wakener's Frond and you don't have like any other good trinkets, I would still say that Wakener's Frond is like way better than most other trinkets. It's even now at a 236 Shadow Grasp totem here, I could probably say that Wakener's Frond is maybe even better than that Shadow Grasp totem in terms of pure damage. However, I already have that one on use in the Inscrutable Quantum device, right? So if I would play Wakener's Frond as well here, it would just misalign my IQD with the Coordinated Assault. It would just be a mess. So that's why I'm not playing Frond. But if you don't have any of these, I think, or if you don't like have any other on-use trinkets, I think Wakener's Frond is incredibly good. If you don't have either Wakener's Frond or Inscrutable Quantum device, there's also the overcharged Anima battery from Spires. This is really strong. It gives you a good amount of haste on a 1.5 minute CD, which means that it is going to line up with that Coordinated Assault and that Resonating Arrow every single time. In terms of other gear, there isn't really too much. If you're looking to the raid, you can obviously go for the 9 Spear, Jotunggeir, Destiny's Call here. Really strong for survival, but you've also got to keep in mind that it doesn't give any secondary stats, so swapping to something else, if you can do that when this is on cooldown, might be useful. There is a macro to do it on at least one-handed classes. I think hunters can do it as well, since you can like equip daggers in the offhand or any of those weird weapons that we talked about in the weapon skill segment, lol. But yeah, this is good. It does give you that 200 mastery, right, which isn't great, so it's obviously maybe a little bit worse than some of the unused trinkets, and it does your cooldown, so take that with a grain of salt. If you're wondering what raid set to use, I would suggest playing Blood, because Blood is gonna do a good amount of damage. It works with your pet with some of the gems when you do like helpful abilities, and the big thing here is that Blood is gonna do a lot of HPS for you, which counteracts the fact that you're so squishy as a survival hunter. So maybe Blood set is going to do slightly less damage than Unholy set, especially if you're doing the like full Steel Trap Mongoose Bite build, and you get like a big Unholy proc in this window here, then Unholy might edge out a little bit, but I would personally prefer playing Blood in pretty much every single scenario. If you want to gear through dungeons, then I would definitely suggest you play mostly Spires of Ascension. Spires of Ascension has 2 different weapons. Now, they're not great stats, but stat doesn't really matter that much. If you're just looking to get your hands on a good 2-hander, which is going to improve your DPS a lot, right? Then Spires has 2 of them, which is incredibly useful. They also have some really good static gear in all the other slots, and you have the overcharged anima battery in there, which is one of the best unused trinkets for survival hunters. So Spires has a ton of value in it. If you are planning to do the Kyrian campaign, there is a Spires quest on chapter 3 of that. Now, you've also got to remember that once 9.1.5 comes out, you can just skip the campaign if you've already done it on another character, so keep that in mind. So we're finally at the rotation, the most fun part, right? And we're starting out with the single target rotation here. I am only gonna play the AoE build here. I'm only gonna play this build because I don't know enough about the Birds of Prey Steel Trap Mongoose Bite build to play it. I don't have the Legendary either, so it would just barely be any point to it. And this is the build that you're gonna run in dungeons anyway, right? And here, remember, you could play Flanking Strike Viper's Venom, or Triple Spear Alpha Predator, or any combination of those that you like. It doesn't really matter too much. But I prefer Alpha Predator to the Spear most of the time, so that's why I'm gonna try out right now. You do have somewhat of a priority list as the survival hunter, right? Your bomb is the most important thing to keep off cooldown. Then you have stuff like Serpent Sting uptime. You obviously want to never sit at 2 kill command charges, and you never want to sit at full focus. So those are kind of the things that you need to make sure to spend. In between that, the rotation is mostly going to consist of just kill commanding and raptor striking over and over again on single targets, sadly. But hey, that's most specs in an AoE build anyway. So if we're pretending to pull here, we would obviously push our cooldowns, throw a bomb, and then start applying Serpent Sting. Once we've pushed all of our buttons and we have all of these things rolling though, most of the rotation is, as I said, just going to be kill command and raptor strike. Now, the one thing you're going to have to think about is your bombs. Remember how we talked about the wildfire infusion earlier and how that actually impacts your gameplay a little bit? Well, now for example, we have a pheromone bomb coming up, so we would want to be at a fairly low amount of focus to capitalize on that kill command reset. Next up, we have a volatile bomb that's going to refresh our Serpent Sting, so we want to make sure to get the maximum efficiency on that Serpent Sting refresh with the volatile bomb. Next up, we have a shrapnel bomb, right? So we want to make sure to have a full focus bar to spend a lot on that bomb. And that's pretty much it on single target. Now, you can see that you have a fair amount of leeway here. Once you know which your next bomb is going to be, you still have like at least 10 or 15 seconds to actually assess the situation, start prep for that bomb before you need to use it, right? I'm not losing any damage here until this thing reaches 2 charges. And you can also see here that my kill command is resetting like all the time, which is another reason why I think that just socketing strength of the pack into one of these empowered ones is going to be really, really strong. There isn't really much to it apart from this. I would definitely say that this is a little bit of a brain-dead rotation on single target, sadly, and you will get slightly bored maybe on dungeon bosses with this, but the fun comes on the AoE parts. So, with all that down, there isn't really a whole lot more to say on single target, so we're gonna move on to AoE. And the first big thing that I touched on briefly when I talked about Wildfire Infusion is that your bombs is a cone, right? Remember this. You need to aim your bombs at the mob that's at the very front of the pack, and you need to position yourself in such a way that it actually hits the entire pack. Very, very important. If I throw my bombs the wrong direction, at the wrong targets, with the wrong angle, then I will do no damage in comparison. Very, very, very important. When it comes to the priority list, it looks very similar to the single target one, except that you suddenly have Carve to use on cooldown, right? And this is skyrockets into your best priority spell here. Theoretically, obviously, your Wildfire Bomb still does more damage. It's still better to press Wildfire Bomb than it is to press Carve. But assuming you have one charge spent on Wildfire Bomb, which you should always have, right? Then Carve becomes your biggest priority spell every time. And the 90% of the Survival Hunter AoE rotation just comes down to carving on cooldown without losing any globals there. Now, in between that, you're still gonna have to pay a lot of attention to these bombs here. And Shrapnel Bomb and Ferrofoam Bomb doesn't really matter on AoE at all, more or less. The only thing you could consider here is that, as you do on single target, right, you kind of want to have a big bar of focus once you use the Shrapnel Bomb, because you would ideally want to be able to like carve, Raptor Strike, carve when that is out. But it's not going to impact your damage that much, so don't worry about that too much. The big thing to worry about on AoE is the Volatile Bomb. It's incredibly strong. And in order to for this to make sense, I think we need to pretend that this is a dungeon pull, right? We pretend that the tank is about to go in here. My pet is the tank. He's running around here. He's a little bit scared. He doesn't really know what to do. He's maybe waiting for my misdirect. And this is the number one thing, right? On every single pull, you should definitely misdirect the tank. Once you've done that, he's like, okay, I have some sense of security in this aggro. I can go in. So he starts running in here and pulling the mobs. When he's doing that, I already have misdirect up, right? So I can start serpent stinging these mobs prematurely when the tank is pulling. So I maybe serpent sting 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times, or however long it takes for a tank to group it up. Then, when the pack is grouped, is where I pop Coordinated Assault into Resonating Arrow and Trinket, right? So I pop every cooldown, and then you go into the same rotation as you did on single target, with the bomb being the first global, and then you would obviously carve straight after that, because as I said before, carve is your by far biggest priority spell. If you're lucky then, and you've targeted all of these mobs with the Serpent Sting, you've pre-pulled, and you're going into a big thing here, then if you are lucky, you will get a green bomb on the second bomb there. And that means that you will be able to refresh all of those Serpent Stings that you just sent out pre-pull with that green bomb. If you're unlucky, as I was now, you won't get a green bomb in the first 2 bombs, and you are gonna have to start Serpent Stinging things up again, right, in between those 2 bombs. So, okay, so let's try that once in real time. We're misdirecting the tank. The tank is running in, he's pulling, and we're Serpent Stinging a couple of times. We can say that the pack is maybe already grouped up. We're popping our CDs. We actually do get a green bomb here, right? So in that case, we want to refresh as many Serpent Stings as possible, which means we would want to apply even more of them in between the carves, and then obviously refresh them. And now we actually get the very, very best scenario possible here. We got another green bomb in the 2 next bombs after that, which means that you can actually keep those Serpent Stings that you were doing at the start rolling. Now, at some point, as we did now, we're not going to get another green bomb, right? So there we had to drop all of those Serpent Stings, which means that we would want to Serpent Sting most things up again. Now, this is something you don't want to do, right? You don't want to start Serpent Stinging 5 mobs in a row here, spending all of your focus, because you're going to lose a ton of uptime on the carve and the bombs and the kill commands and basically everything else. So how the spec plays in practice is that you obviously want to bomb and carve, and then in between these carves, where you have like a couple of seconds, you need to assess what to do, right? So either you could Serpent Sting stuff up, which is usually a pretty good idea, especially if you have a green bomb coming up, or you could Raptor Strike something, which is going to cost you some focus, but it is going to spend those Tip of the Spear charges, right? So if you do have 3 Tip of the Spear charges up, you could start looking at Raptor Striking. Or if you notice that you might have trouble making the next carve, right? If you really start on focus, you're carving, you're bombing, and then maybe you're rapid striking again here, you're like, fuck, I really need to get my energy up for carve, then you would obviously kill command in between the carve. So you do have some different stuff to do, and the skill here comes from using those globals in between your carve effectively to actually do something good. And most likely this is going to be serpent sting stuff, right? As long as you have enough energy for the next carve anyway, then serpent sting stuff up is never really a bad idea. Because eventually you are going to get that green bomb, and when you get that green bomb, you're going to be able to refresh all of those serpent stings. You're going to be very happy that you have them rolling. At the tail end here of the guide, I just want to go through some tips and tricks for you guys to maybe help you out a little bit in the dungeons. One thing you can do that is tied to the wildfire bombs is to cycle through them, right? Because as I talked about with the volatile bomb, the green one is by far the best one, right? So if you are in a pack and this pack is about to die, for example, and you notice that you're not on a green bomb, right? Then a good thing would maybe be to cycle these bombs here to try to get a green bomb. Now it didn't really work this time, but sometimes it will work. You will get a green bomb going into the next pack. So if you know that your bombs are going to be more or less recharging by the time you get to the next pack, then cycling them before you kill the pack can be a really good thing. Now the reverse scenario of that obviously is if you have a green bomb when the pack is about to die, right? So let's say this pack is about to die. I do have a green bomb stored up here, and I could use it for some extra damage on this pack, sure, but it might be even better to just save this bomb and kill the pack without using any bombs, let them recharge up to 2, and then once you go and pull the next pack up here, you actually have a green bomb going into the pack. And if you have a green bomb going into the pack, then it's going to be a very reliable pull, right? You're going to have this misdirect, serpent sting things up, and you know that you have a green bomb, right? So you don't need to worry too much about like, oh shit, am I serpent sting too much? Am I serpent sting too little? You'll just serpent sting as much as you can basically before it becomes excessive, and then you refresh those with the bomb, which is gonna be a ton of explosive damage from the violent reaction and some serpent sting value from refreshing it. So cycling bombs can be really good. If you're playing Forge Light Prime Mechanicos with this effusive anim accelerator, then I would also advise you to use your resonating arrow very liberally in the dungeons. As I talked about earlier with the example of coordinated assault coming up, and you actually using resonating arrow once and then once more in the tail end of the coordinated assault, similar to that, you can just like send out your resonating arrow ASAP most of the time, right? If you see a good scenario to just pop it down, and your coordinated assault is of like a 30-second cooldown or more left, then I would definitely recommend you to just pop down the resonating arrow, right? It's going to do a lot of damage, it's going to buff your damage on that pack, and more or less you will always have it back by the next coordinated assault. One really useful thing to help you survive a little bit more is to use all your different pets. So, for example, you have the Lust pet, right? And the pet families are Ferocity, Tenacity, Cunning, obviously. Ferocity is the Lust pet. It gives you some Leech as well. And this can be pretty decent as a defensive pet, I guess. Once you have like a good amount of versatility, once you have a good amount of gear, then that Leech is going to start kicking in a bit and make you a little bit more tanky. But you are quite squishy with the Lust pet out, I would say. And I'm usually only using this when I know that I'm the group's Lust, that I need to actually press the thing. If I'm not, then just using the defensive pet is probably going to be a better idea. And even if I am the Lust, I can just summon the Lust pet, use the Lust, and then dismiss it after the fight and use the defensive pet until my Lust is up again, right? So I don't, even if I am the Lust, I don't have to use the Lust pet for the entire dungeon necessarily. The survival pet is going to give you survival of the fittest, and it'll also give you 5% max HP, which both are pretty decent in helping you survive in dungeons. Especially if you're a bad survival hunter, you get hit by some melee abilities a lot and stuff like that. Then this pet might be pretty good for you. Another little tech thing you can do on a survival hunter, as I mentioned in the talent section, Bloodseeker is going to synergize very well with bleed classes. So if you are creating your own groups or signing up for groups, make sure to look out for especially Guardian Druids. I find are just the best enabler of this, right? Because Guardian Druids are good, they are quite prevalent in some pug keys right now, and they will bleed every single pack, right? They constantly trash on every single pack. If you do something like a Arms Warrior, for example, then they might only like AoE bleed if they Blade Storm or whatever. I can't really remember how Arms plays, but especially if you have a Guardian Druid, this thing is going to have a 100% uptime on every single one, right? Very strong. Another thing you can do with your pet is to pull stuff through walls. So this is mostly useful in like Mists of Turner's Scythe. If you know those mist doors that you can't pass through unless you reach a puzzle. If we say that a mist door is in front of us right here, and we can't really go in there yet, well, we might still want to pull that pack into this room that we're in right now, so we can kill this pack in this room and the pack in the next room at once. So what you could do is you could send your pet attacking this mob through the mist door, because if you do walk up to the door, you will see these HP bars of the mobs through the wall, right? So you can send your pet in there, then once the pet is attacking them or has their aggro, you pull your pet back with pet passive. They will start chasing your pet back to the room and go through the door, and you can kill 2 packs at a time. Somewhere else where this useful is just if you want more percentage in the dungeon, right? So it doesn't even have to be the door that you're going to go through. You could just pull yet another pack from like a random mist door into your pack, and you will have extra percentage in the mist maze that you then won't have to make up at the very end of the dungeon. This could also be useful in other dungeons, but I mostly find it working in mists. Alright guys, that's it for my survival hunter guide. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and consider subscribing. Otherwise, stay tuned and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.